Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into what is honestly a fascinating historical detective story. We're going to uncover how a massive theological shift in late antiquity completely rewrote ancient Arabia's legal and social code. It's a story all about gender, power, and rhetoric, and how changing who holds spiritual authority fundamentally changes the reality of a deeply patriarchal world. Let's dive in.
So the whole mystery really kicks off with this incredibly direct, forceful confrontation right in the text of the Quran. It's one of the most historically debated passages out there. In Surah Al-Najm, the text specifically calls out three female deities by name. It asks, have you considered Al-Lat and Al-Uzza and Manat the third? And it basically roasts the ancient Meccans for worshiping these three figures as the literal, actual daughters of Allah.
But for historians, this immediately raises a huge question. Did the ancient Arabs actually literally believe these goddesses were the biological or spiritual daughters of God? Or is there something way more sophisticated going on here? Is the Quran maybe using this as a brilliant rhetorical framing device to go after a much deeper power structure within Arabian society? Well, to figure that out, we have to look past the text itself and dig into the actual stones of history.
To solve this, we really need to track the archaeological footprints of these three deities across the entire Arabian religious network. And what we find is that these were absolutely not just generic, minor pagan idols hidden away in the desert. No, they were highly specialized, formidable powerhouses. You had Al-Lat, who was deeply tied to fertility, protection, and local sovereignty. Then there's Al-Uzza, associated with strength and victory. Honestly, she functioned much like a powerful warrior goddess. And Manat was tied to fate, time, and death, dealing with the deepest existential anxieties people had back then. They were completely integrated into the everyday spiritual and practical life of the region.
Now, when we actually picture these deities, there's a huge contrast in the historical record. Usually, when we hear the word idols, we just picture crude, human-shaped statues, right? But the archaeology shows us a totally different, highly sophisticated reality. On one hand, you have this minimalist, aniconic tradition, like the famous Baetyl of Al-Uzza found in Petra. It's basically an abstract block of stone with geometric eyes, acting as a cosmic placeholder for a divine force that was just too vast for a human shape. But then, on the other hand, thanks to global trade, we see them depicted in full Greco-Roman style. Up in Palmyra, Al-Lat was carved looking exactly like the Greek goddess Athena. It's wild to realize these were truly globalized entities, revered from the Mediterranean all the way down to the Red Sea.
But here is where we hit a massive plot twist. When archaeologists scour through thousands of temple inscriptions and rock carvings all across ancient Arabia, they find something completely unexpected. Out of all the physical evidence confirming how widely they were worshipped, there was literally zero direct contemporary proof that anyone explicitly called them daughters of Allah. The actual worshippers, the people of the time, never seemed to carve that specific phrase into stone anywhere.
Instead, the historical evidence points us toward a concept academics call associationism. The ancient Arabs most likely already acknowledged Allah as the supreme creator. But, like a lot of cultures in late antiquity, they relied heavily on these female deities as a sort of VIP gateway to God. Think of them as exclusive patrons or powerful intermediaries you'd pray to so they could put in a good word for you with the supreme deity. So the core debate wasn't actually about denying God's existence, it was all about who was allowed to share in his sacred authority and who could grant you access to him. And right here is where the Quran executes an absolutely brilliant piece of rhetorical judo to dismantle that entire intermediary system. It uses what we call gender irony. It basically points a spotlight at a massive, glaring contradiction in 7th century Arabia. On one side, you have this incredibly patriarchal society that actively devalued human daughters, strongly preferring sons for things like inheritance, status, and tribal power. But then on the theological side, these exact same men are hypocritically assigning divine daughters to the supreme God.
So the crucial takeaway here is that this wasn't just some high-minded theological debate about the nature of the divine. It was a completely devastating social critique. The text is essentially mocking them, asking, wait, you devalue daughters socially, yet you assign them to the divine? It takes their own deep-seated patriarchal biases and weaponizes those biases against them to strip these female intermediaries of their prestige. It totally exposes the paradox and hypocrisy of ancient Meccan power dynamics.
But the real academic bombshell, the thing that really shifts our understanding, lies in how these ancient worshippers actually addressed their deities before Islam came along. When you look at Nabatean and Palmyrian inscriptions, they definitely didn't call them daughters. They exalted them as the mothers of the gods. And in the ancient Near East, a mother deity holds absolute, independent authority. She's an autonomous creator, a powerful matriarch. She's a pure force of nature in her own right.
So by deliberately changing their title from mother to daughter, the Quran is actually executing a massive linguistic demotion. Think about that power shift for a second. A mother rules in her own right, but a daughter is subordinate. In that society, she's completely dependent on a father figure for her status and her power. Branding them as daughters was a masterfully calculated social strategy. It successfully stripped these female deities of their autonomous power before the debate even reached the point of denying their existence.
This intense tension over intermediary power and female divine authority eventually peaked in a historical memory known as the Garanik incident. It perfectly captures just how desperate the Meccan elites were to hold on to their existing power structure. They were apparently willing to negotiate. They were ready to accept Allah as the one supreme God, but only if they could just keep their beloved goddesses functioning as high-flying cranes. In their poetic tradition, these cranes were a metaphor for powerful, majestic birds that could carry human prayers all the way up to the heavens as intermediaries.
But that compromise was completely, utterly rejected. And many historians view that exact rejection as the 0 hour of Islamic identity. Strict absolute monotheism was established specifically by severing this female-centered intermediary system once and for all. No divine mothers, no interceding daughters, no heavenly cranes. Access to the divine had to be direct. And this wasn't just about losing a few mediators, it was the total erasure of the feminine from the absolute highest levels of spiritual authority, shifting the culture entirely to a single male-coded supreme power.
And we cannot overstate how incredibly high the stakes were for the society, because these goddesses weren't just abstract, faraway ideas that you prayed to. They were literally the law. Just look at the chilling warning carved into a tomb in Hagra. May the curse of Manat fall upon anyone who defiles this grave. These female deities were actively, physically integrated into the judicial and funerary infrastructure of Arabia. Manat was a cosmic enforcer of property and legal rights.
And it goes even further. There is an incredible inscription from the famous Lion of Allah statue in Palmyra that proves these deities were the supreme guardians of peace and ethical law. The symbolism is striking. You have this massive, fierce lion gently protecting a fragile little gazelle resting between its paws. It perfectly symbolizes the goddess's fierce protection over the weak and her strict enforcement of non-violence within her sanctuary. So, erasing them meant erasing the very foundation of societal protection. Because of this, erasing the goddesses was so much more than just a theological update. By shifting away from a female-centered legal network to a unified, male-coded monotheistic law, the everyday social and legal status of human women in 7th century Arabia was fundamentally altered. This transition completely dismantled and rewrote the existing legal, social, and ethical fabric of the era. It changed exactly who held power, and more importantly, who enforced the law. So let's quickly piece together how this brilliantly calculated shift actually played out. Step 1. The goddesses hold massive international authority as autonomous mothers and absolute legal enforcers. Step 2. The Quranic polemic comes in and linguistically demotes them from independent mothers to subordinate daughters. Step 3. It weaponizes that gender irony to brutally expose the patriarchal hypocrisy of the society. And finally, Step 4. The entire intermediary system is completely abolished, paving the way for a direct, totally unmediated relationship with a single god.
Ultimately, what you should take away from this is that the rise of early Islam was absolutely not just a simplistic polytheism versus monotheism debate. It was a deeply sophisticated, multi-layered struggle over authority, gender, and access. It forces society to answer profound questions. Who actually deserves worship? Who holds the authority to mediate between humanity and God? And who, at the end of the day, controls access to the divine? By removing those goddesses, an entirely new social and spiritual hierarchy was born.
But, all of this leaves us with one massive, lingering mystery. If these incredibly powerful deities weren't just isolated, primitive idols, but were actually part of a highly sophisticated, globalized legal network that managed wealth and power, then what exactly was going on inside their central sanctuary? What was the Kaaba really being used for before Islam? Was it just a simple museum of statues, or was it the tax-free, international beating heart of an empire? Well, we are going to uncover exactly that in our next explainer. Thanks so much for learning with me today.